Coffee.
Or when Director Elliott gets back, whichever's first.
Or second. Coffee first, yeah, very important.
I'm
gonna something a little stronger than coffee.
Okay, we ready to go?
We sure are. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Corporate Officer. So I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee, Wednesday, June the 7th, 2023, to order. First up, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Ho'ete, also known as Lasqueti Island. We have an agenda before us. Would anyone like to make any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, would someone like to move approval of the agenda? Director Lennox, Director Brander, any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Okay, minutes. We have minutes from the Finance Committee meeting of May the 3rd, 2023. Are there any changes or revisions anyone would like to make? And seeing...
Yeah.
May the, don't we have minutes of May the 3rd? I'm looking at the wrong agenda. Oh, May the 3rd is what my agenda has.
Should be June 7th.
Oh, June the 7th. We are June the 7th. I'm talking about the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of May the 3rd. Oh, June the, or the July. Oh, okay. Why is my agenda?
I've sent you a link to the agenda.
Yeah, I'm just looking to the wrong agenda. I had the June agenda open. My apologies. Let's get to that.
Let's get you on the right agenda.
Get you on the right agenda. I had it open. I just didn't have July the 5th. Right. Okay. Minutes of the.
You saw too.
Thank you, everyone. I had it open. I was just looking at the wrong one in my multi-tab. Okay, so the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting June the 7th, 2023. Are there any changes to that one? Seeing none, would someone like to move adoption of that? Director Elliott, Director Gisborne, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Okay, we have no delegations. We have some unfinished business. The first one up is reconsideration of the LIFT Community Service Financial Assistance Grant application. Chair Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I have a motion here, and I believe the staff have it. I don't know if they want to bring it up on screen, but give the corporate officer a moment to do that. Thank you. It just says that the committee recommended to the board that the board approve a grant of $50,000 to LIFT for the Community Resource Center from the Social Planning Service.
Does anyone like to second that? And I can't see, the screen is so small now.
Director Doubt.
Director Doubt. Okay, thank you, Director Doubt. Okay, discussion
I think
on that. Director Brander, did you want to say something first? I still can't.
I have a point of order.
Oh, yes.
I think if we're going to reconsider a motion, there needs to be a motion of reconsideration that has to pass.
Right, corporate officer, could you help us with the process here?
Okay, so sorry. Did we ever? I don't believe we've ever passed a motion on this item.
No, we have not.
So I don't believe that there was ever a motion. Okay, yes.
Director Doubt.
In the minutes that we just approved, there is a moved and seconded on page 13 of 15 of the minutes. The committee recommend to the board that the board approve a $50,000 grant to the Community Resource Center for Social Planning Service. I think that's a motion. You have a recommendation to the committee. My point of order is if we're going to do something, First, pass some motion to reconsider that decision that was made and defeated.
Thank you, Director Dowd. I think that helps. So
decision that I support.
Okay, great. So after a vote has been taken on any question except for one for tabling or postponing, a member, except for the chair who voted in the majority on the matter, may move to reconsider the motion at the same or the next regular or special meeting of the board. So we would just need to know who voted. I'm trying to find it.
So I believe the vote was in favor was Director Dowd, Director Elliott, and myself, and opposed were Director Brander, Director Gisborne, and Director McCormick.
So that's in the majority though, not. So you would, Clay would be appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Director Brander. You're not Clay here.
Fine.
What are we doing this one here? Okay, so we just need a motion to reconsider now? Is that what we're asking for? Okay, so are you moving a motion to?
Sure, I believe it's the same motion.
Well, they'd be two separate.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Move the motion.
Okay, so a motion to reconsider, and is there a seconder for the motion to reconsider? Director Lennox. Okay, so any discussion on the motion to reconsider? And I have a question for the corporate officer. So if we, this motion is it just to get it back on the table? This motion to reconsider isn't the motion itself, it's just to bring it back and then we go forward.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, Director McCormick.
Thank you. Chair, I just have a question, perhaps of Director Brander. Is there new information that you have that was not considered at the previous Finance Committee meeting? Is that the basis for reconsidering?
Well, other than the delegation that appeared at the board meeting.
Okay, so that's it. Okay.
And there is to the chair, I apologize. There is the Community Resource Center Community Relations and Site Security Plan, which is included as part of this agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Could I see Director Dowd had his hand up?
I was just going to point out that there's that FYI, at least on the electronic version of the agenda that was recently placed on there, which is existing and future plans.
Okay, Director McCormick.
I haven't seen that, sorry, Jared. Because the part that I'm especially interested in, and I raised this at the last committee meeting, is there a plan? Do they have a plan for dealing with the disorder and crime in the neighborhood? Is that in the?
I see the CAO. Mr. Radke, can you help us here?
The chair, if I'm not mistaken, the assistant corporate officer sent that out yesterday.
Yeah. By email.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any further? We okay to go? Is there any further discussion on the motion to reconsider this item, which has been made? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. So on the motion to reconsider, all those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, so now we're able to reconsider, and if I understand the process, Mr. Director Brander is able to. Does that bring the motion directly back, or can he make a motion he made, which may be the same? Corporate officer.
Motion's on the table already now that you guys have, so now we're considering another motion. Once you've approved reconsideration.
Okay, so this puts it back on now. The original motion's on the table. Director Brander, as I doubt, I should say.
Original motion meaning the one I made today. I think it's the same motion.
It is the same.
Director Dowd, did you have a comment?
I have a comment. I read the additional plans that it has, their current plans and their plans in the future, which will require additional plans. I think they're good plans. It's a valuable service. Frankly, saves lives in the community. And I think it's an appropriate use of regional district funds to do that. I support the new motion 100%. So I believe we could say grants $50,000 from the social planning service to the resource center. Good use of funds. I support it. I think we could all be willing to support political efforts through our MLA and through others to get more provincial government support for the assistance that's needed for homeless and vulnerable people within the community. When I say community, I mean the entire region.
Okay, thank you, Director Dowd. Is there any other discussion? Director Gisborne and Director McCormick.
Couple of things. First is Director Dowd just brought up that this benefits the entire region. The work that LIFT does at the CRC provides a regional benefit. However, we heard from LIFT that when they approached the city to apply for a grant, it didn't fit with the city's grant criteria. So they haven't applied to the city for funding. We have now come to the regional district and asked for grant funding. In this case, $50,000. That's not a small chunk of change. It's a big chunk of change. They are not applying to get funding from the general grant and aid. General grant and aid is paid for by everyone. The social planning service is only paid for by the electoral areas, A, B, C, E, and E. The electoral areas are roughly 1/3 of the population. 2/3 of the population reside within the city limits. I find it very inappropriate to expect 1/3 of the population to pay $50,000 towards the support of the community resource center, and the other 2/3 of the population doesn't pay. What has been brought up throughout this discussion and this item is that our social planning service doesn't seem to align with the municipality's ability to provide grants for social planning endeavors. Now, the social planning service was created before my time, but my understanding was it was created to be a mechanism to partner with the municipality to fund a social planner and to fund grants that fit the social planning framework. But what we're seeing before us is, as I understand it, the city no longer has a social planner, and LIFT isn't able to apply for the grant from the city. So I'm starting to even wonder why we have a social planning service anymore. We do a service review. That's on the social planning side of it. If we do want to give money to LIFT, I would be more in support if it came from the general grant, not the social planning service. That's the first. Second issue, proper land use. The issue of the CRC is its location. Yes, it provides a benefit to the community. That is true. But it's located right next to our Tourist Information Center. And it's located right next to the dental office. In land use planning, you don't really expect to approve a industrial operation next to a school. I don't support having the CRC located next to our Tourist Information Center. We've already heard from the Tourist Bureau that the operation of the center is resulting in greater costs, and we do provide funding. So we already are paying for what's going on up there. So I don't support funding the CRC in its current location because it's impacting regional district services already. That's the second one. And the third, which is probably the most important, is the vast majority of LIFT's funding comes from the province. And there's a reason for it. The provincial government is responsible for handling these kind of social issues. What's been happening over time is the province has been underfunding their responsibility and leaning more and more on local governments to pick up the slack. And my thoughts are is if we approve this $50,000 grant, a lift, then we're signaling to the province that, yeah, we'll take on the responsibility for that. We'll charge the local taxpayers to start helping lift and help these which are within their responsibility. Crunching the numbers for the electoral areas, it's like what, $8 a person from the electoral areas for this grant. I don't know if I can convince my constituents with that kind of money for Thursday when it's only coming from the electoral areas. So for those three reasons, I can't support this. It's not equitable, it's not our responsibility and jurisdiction, and it's a bad location. No, I'm sorry. I do like the work they do, it's good work. But...
Thank you, Director Gisborne. So Director McCormick has her hand up, and then I saw Director Elliott after. So Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. When I look at the list that is on the addendum, I guess, through the agenda, and I see a number of items that are in the box: hourly rendered checks, partnership with the RCMP, Daily Sharp Street, Good Neighbor Agreement, etc. Those are things that are all in place now, correct? Perhaps that is a question to staff.
Yeah, maybe to maybe the Mr. Cohen. As I see Mr. Radke has his hand up. CEO.
Through the chair, I can't comment on on what the author wrote. That is what they supplied to you at your request.
Right.
So
okay.
Any questions you have, you need to be directed through them.
Well, I would take that these are already in place because there's two items designated as new, which is the picnic area and the signage and the night caretaker. And they may help in dealing with the disorder that tourism Fall River has been experiencing. I don't know that they'll go far enough because there's already a lot of things in place that are quite ineffective because in spite of Good Neighbor Agreement, etc., the problems are still occurring. So I have my reservations about that. But my question, Chair, pertains to how the social planning service is funded. Perhaps Mr. Copenhagen, whatever, could answer that question, because does the city not contribute to that fund?
I believe not, but Mr. Cohenhoven can answer that for us, I believe.
Thank you, through the chair. No, the city does not participate in the social planning service. It is the electoral areas as well as the Seashell Indian Government District.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer to that question.
Okay, you're done, Mr. Director McCormick. Okay, on to Director Elliott, and then I saw Director Brander and Director Lennox, so we'll go around and then I'll talk. But, Director Elliott.
Director Dowd as well.
Director Dowd. Okay, Director Elliott, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I think that the Community Resource Center is different than some of the other social initiatives that they contract from the province to deliver. So one of the things that happens when you're a nonprofit is you can do contracts from the government to deliver services, and you get direct funding from the provincial government for delivering those services. You're not allowed to transfer or use any of that money for any of your other charitable stuff. So the Community Resource Center predates a lot of those services and isn't funded by the provincial government at all, and has typically been funded through things like grants from local governments. And the city has quite regularly offered the permissive tax exemption. In this last go round, Lyft applied for their permissive tax exemptions in one lump sum for all of their properties, including those that were services being delivered by the provincial government. And part of the permissive tax exemption is to put forward your financial data and show that you are indeed in need of that. And they could not meet the test of financial need for all of their properties that were lumped into that one application. I suggest if they wanted to zero in on properties that were not funded by the provincial government in the future and apply for just those ones, they might have a different response. I don't know for sure. I'd have to talk to some folks who knew more about that. But it wasn't because the city didn't want to fund the Community Resource Center. The Community Resource Center is unique in the services that it provides. It links poverty law, it links social workers, clinical workers on the mobile team, provides access to even pharmaceutical services for folks who can't find what they need elsewhere. They have clinics there for various health-related things that people wouldn't be able to access unless they had a family doctor, which most of these people do not. There's ways to link folks who are fleeing violence to the services they need. So the Community Resource Center is not a service provided by the provincial government. They're a service that is being funded through wholly fundraising, nonprofit, volunteers, and because it's a service our community desperately needs with that is on the rise as well with the price of housing going up. More people are finding themselves in need of these kinds of connections because they don't know how to access these resources because they've never needed them before. And many of the problematic crime problems in the street are actually, they've reported, and I believe them, and I've heard it from the dentist as well next door, that it's not so much when they're open, because the staff do a great job when they're open. The problem is when they're closed. I fail to see how putting them in a position where they have to have less hours and be closed more is going to address any of those issues whatsoever. And I also don't understand the idea that we should hold one community organization responsible for what's happening in our community when they're closed. I don't get the rationale there at all. They did fight and got more funding for 24-hour shelter, which has been helping. It gives people a place to go all the time right now. So that's helping. What helps is increasing connection for people in our community, increasing services that they need. I don't see how withdrawing funding and services from people who are desperately needing them and vulnerable is going to solve our problem. If you want to transition to something else, that's a bigger conversation where we take all the parties to the table, we transition for the future. Chopping people off at the knees and while they're bleeding, asking them to make a new plan is really a bad idea, in my opinion. I think the city could easily participate in funding LIFT. I would be in favor of that. We don't currently have a funding mechanism for them to apply for that. We have community forest grants, which aren't really social in nature, but would help with infrastructure. And LIFT has received some of that in the past for some of their infrastructure needs. We have the permissive tax exemptions, which the vote has passed this year for that. And I'm not entirely sure why we haven't considered having the city added to the social planning grant process that we have here. I don't have the history on that either because I'm fairly new to this board. I don't really know why we do these things the way we do. I'd be very interested in hearing about that. But for this year, if we can't get the social planning envelope to fund this particular purpose, I would be in favor of moving it to general grants and aid where we can participate. I don't want to just do this not funding LIFT thing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott. Director Brender was next, and then Director Lennox.
Great, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I am willing to support this motion. I made the motion. I'm willing to support this motion because I think that LIFT coming down here and appearing as a delegation and them writing up their plan is evidence that they recognize that there are issues and they're looking for solutions to either take initiatives on their own or to form partnerships with other organizations in our community or potentially on a provincial level. So I see that their attention has been brought to it, and I appreciate that, but I also think they do a lot of good work. And as Director Elliott has stated, a lot of these issues occur when they are not there. So maybe holding them responsible is not exactly the right thing, but like I said, reaching out to others in the community to figure out how we can collectively deal with these problems, I think that's a good way to go. I also, recognize Director Gisborne's concerns about funding, but I think there may be some potential for changes in the way the grants are given. I think what we need to do is focus on what we do, focus less on what the municipality is taking care of, and just figure out what can we do around this table and do what is right for us at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Brander. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've been thinking about this one a lot and come to some of this, how we apply grants and things with new eyes. And I agree with some of the comments that have been made about how we can sort of target these initiatives a little bit better and maybe working at our services better. When I look at the list of what we're going to discuss today and what's under general grants and aid versus social, then we run into some lack of funding when we start talking about all of our applications. So I think that's what we're getting at. I want to take care of people. I think the people in my area and the region want to take care of people, and the increase, the demand is increasing. I wrote a bunch of notes. I'll try to be brief. I see at least a 5-year pattern of applying for, basically overhead cost funding. And again, this comes back to some of the points that have been made about the province properly funding the applications and which buckets they go into. When I look at the revenue statements for this application, the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction is a major contributor to this. So that's tax dollars. So, I understand what we're talking about, who's funding what. That's where it's coming from. Our policies, the board must not provide assistance to industrial, commercial, business undertakings. With $1.7 million in net assets, I mean, it appears to be a business in many ways, and maybe that's just my perspective, but it makes me think about those obligations. Again, we talked about the grant and aid, the lack of application to the city, and I actually appreciate the comments that were made and some of the avenues that we can explore there, and I encourage the city to do that. Social planning. Those applications are considered for enhanced social cohesion. That's the first bullet. This is consolidating social cohesion in a small group. So I think that part of what's happening is the social cohesion is lacking still, and education is part of that. But that objective needs to be considered when we're applying our grants. Addressing root causes of poverty. I think this does help. This type of funding does help in general for poverty reduction and harm reduction, contributing to the vitality and livability of our community. For whom though? So we've had some clear feedback that the vitality and livability is being affected by some of the activities that are happening there. Foster social inclusion. Again, my point earlier, social inclusion for a small group of the folks that are there. I think that it's creating barriers for social inclusion for others. And equity. Social equity, so many supports are in place. $50,000, we've been told by the presentation, is basically maintaining 1 day out of 3, if I remember correctly, of services. The need is increasing. The question I kept coming back to, will the application of $50,000 help or hurt the situation on the street? I was pleased to see, and I think it's a major issue, that there's been a tangible positive reduction in ER costs and visits to our primary care at the hospital. And I know from working there, that's been a huge burden. And so if we can do anything to reduce that, that's on the positive side. I got to tell you, I went up and I sat and watched the CRC just so I could just kind of keep my eyes open and my ears open and see how things are going. And it was quite apparent over a couple of days that I did that there's some profound antisocial behavior that's occurring at certain times of the day. And be that as it may, I actually bumped into one of the staff at the tourism center as they opened. And I just asked, can I talk to you for a little bit? And Sandy, I appreciate your, last month you educating us on what your feedback from the committee, and it was profound. And, first of all, they were very appreciative that we were asking the question, that we're trying to get a good perspective. They really reinforced a lot of the negative things that are happening. And, they can't have a picnic table out front because people start shooting up and they start burning things and they leave debris. And the tourists, there's been conflict in they really laid it out what the negative impacts were. And, it was pretty sobering. There are services that are available from other agencies that do some of this work, but I know it's important when it's all in one spot. And I think we need to really be cognizant that the community groups, taxpayers, they feel like some of those obligations in the plan that you just referenced haven't been met or not well enough. And there's been 2 additional actions proposed. I think that does help because a presence is actually what kind of tones things down around there. So almost done. LIFT has suggested some future looking actions, and I think that we should do everything we can to support those, but it's incumbent upon them as the service provider to push through with that. So, the cost of the location of the center, I think, is poor right now. That's just my personal opinion, having our tourists come into our town and be confronted with even what I saw this morning. It's intimidating for people at a first start, regardless of the safety factor. So finally, I come back to the question I raised earlier, and I asked this of the people that are the neighbors and the staff there. If we don't support this, does it help or hurt? And in most people's feelings, it'll hurt, and it'll make the situation a little bit worse. And so I am reservedly prepared to support the motion, but I think there's a lot of work to do there. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lennox. I'll speak a few words and then recognize a second round, starting with Director Dowd. Prior to the establishment of the social planning service in late 2018, the CRC received grants via general grant and aid, including $25,150 in 2016, $30,150 in 2017, and $50,000 in 2018. In 2019, the social planning service was fully functional and established, and the grants to the for the CRC were shifted to the social planning service. Each year from 2019 to 2022, the CRC has been granted $50,000, although last year is a little bit mixed because we granted LIFT a combined grant. This seemed to make sense as the CRC provides a vital social service, as we've talked about, and I really concur with the comments from Director Lennox. I think this question of whether the funds we provide cause more harm than good or more good than harm, and I think that's a really good way to look at it. However, the shift of funding from general grants and aid to social planning had the side effect of shifting the costs to be entirely from the electoral areas, as has been discussed. The contribution from the electoral areas to social planning grants is approximately double the amount that those areas contribute to general grants and aid. So from a practical point of view, I think it makes sense in the future for this body to consider either shifting the application or the funding for the CRC back to general grant and aid, or finding some other mechanism to do that. I think we've heard some comments to that effect around the board, but that brings us back to where we are right now, which is right now, do we fund the CRC LIFT to support the CRC through the social planning service grant? And I supported this motion at the last finance committee meeting, and I think the information I've heard will lends me to support it again for some of the comments around the table. And I do believe, I really do have concerns about some of the major issues that have been raised. And I think LIFT has heard. I think they should pay attention, and they have heard us, and hopefully they will take action. And I think we need to
in the light. Sorry.
We need to hit the light. I think we need to, hopefully they will be able to show some positive results. And I think we need to follow up with this to make sure that the other effects aren't made worse. But I do think that providing the funding would be better given those concerns than not funding them. Thank you. Director Dowd.
Yeah, thanks. So much to say. So many items we're talking about now. But you know, the decision we're really making is whether or not to make a contribution of $50,000 to youth or to lift community services. And I'll say again that I support that. I think they need other things, that this $50,000 will make it affordable for them to continue doing valuable services that are saving lives in the community. Could the world be better? Yeah, it could. And it'd take more money from somewhere to make it better. If we decide not to pass this resolution, I think there is no question in the world that conditions at the Tourist Bureau and that in downtown Powell River and the Joyce Avenue area will get worse because there will be less services and less occupancy to do that. What is Lyft doing right now in their communication that we just received in the last day or so? There's two new actions that they recorded along with telling us about what they actually do from day to day currently. They're going to build a new picnic area and signage, and I've seen the material parked in their parking lot actually that they're going to use to build a new outdoor seating area behind the CRTC or the CRC to encourage people not to loiter in alleys in front of the parking lot. That's a positive activity that isn't happening yet until as we speak, basically. They have a new initiative for a night caretaker from Monday to Friday, which is a new position starting June 30th, which is last week, 2023, to increase staff capacity after hours on weekends, which has potential to reduce conflict in the community. And after that, they talk about forward-looking proposed solutions requiring community partnerships and additional resources. And there's a long list of things that they could do if they had funding, and that the regional district could help them to find future funding for. Number 6 on the list is development of an emergency response team involving the RCMP and a clinical nurse that specializes in responding to mental health crises. These have been functional and useful in other places in British Columbia and are a positive solution. It's something that we could work with them on. I'm in favor of granting this $50,000 from the social planning service to do that. So having talked about that, we'll talk in more detail about the social planning service. In my understanding, the social planning service is a three-way partnership, was conceived as a three-way partnership between the city of Powell River, the Tla'amin Nation, and the regional district. The city of Powell River employed a social planner and got through the first few years of that to 2022. The social planner is no longer employed by the city of Powell River. That's the future of that position is under discussion. The contribution there of the regional district was to have members on a social planning advisory committee and to provide grant funding. So I think we should really look at that. And the regional district should sit down with the city of Powell River. Now, Councillor Elliott and I, we're municipal directors of the regional district. The regional district should sit down with the city of Powell River and the Tla'amin Nation and take a really good look at the social planning services and make a decision on how that's going to function. Could it be continue as a three-way service? Should that be functioning entirely by the city of Powell River, or are there other ways to do that? Worth talking about, but it's not what we're talking about in this motion. And there's the grant and aid service. Is that providing a function that everybody likes and would like to support and would like to continue? Maybe we need to have a long discussion about that. But for the time being, I think it's to the better good of the community to provide this $50,000 in granting to Lyft, because if we don't do it, the conditions that everybody is telling us they're concerned about will not get better. It will only get worse.
Thank you, Director Doudt. So a second round for people. I see if anyone has further comments, I see Director Gisborne.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
Director Gisborne, yeah.
To the point that the provincial government doesn't fund the Community Resource Center. They do. It's outlined in their budget, and Director Lennox aptly pointed that out. $109,000 a year from the province. to lift for operation of the CRC. This is a provincially funded operation. That's the first one. I'm hearing a lot of talk that there is support around this table to support this grant to lift for the operation of the CRC. But we also around this table have to take into account what's fair for the taxpayers. There's too many people I've gone to school with that have left this town because they can't afford to live here anymore. And when we make a decision at this table, we have to think about equity. What's fair? I don't think anyone at this table would think it would be fair to take $50,000 from, say, Area A to fund the CRC while the rest of the region doesn't pay. I think that'd be very inappropriate. What we have before us is an application or a motion to take it from just the rural areas. And Director Dowd is correct. If LIFT gets this funding, then the downtown of Powell River will see a benefit. Well, then the downtown of Powell River can contribute. And we can do that through general grant and aid, as has been done in the past. And if a director wishes to make an amendment that it comes from general grant and aid, I'd be more likely to support it. But as it currently stands at this committee table, everyone votes one vote. When it goes to the board, it will be just the electoral area directors voting on this item. We gotta think about our balance, not just for LIFT, but for our entire community. There's a lot of folks out there that are getting hit really hard by the price of food and how much their property taxes are going up. And when we take money from them and give it to LIFT, it's not like we're just giving out free money. We're taking it from our taxpayers in our community, and it's not a small chunk of change. And it's not fair to just be taking it from the electoral areas. So, you know, I'll make the motion. I move an amendment that it come from general grant and aid.
Okay, so an amendment's been put on the table. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Director McCormick. Okay, discussion on the amendment to fund this program to lift CRC from general grant and aid.
Yeah. Thank you for the second. I'll speak very briefly. Going around the table, I'm hearing support from municipal directors and some of the electoral area directors. So if this does provide a regional benefit and the directors that are in favor want to support LIFT, then it should come from general grant and aid. But we also then got to keep in mind that there's other community groups that can do a lot of good work with $50,000. So.
Director McCormick.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I really seconded this for discussion purposes, but I have a question, and that is regarding general grants and aid. Does the city contribute to general grants and aid?
Yes, they do.
Okay, all right. In that case, I think it really does make sense to do it from general grants and aid. Because I agree with Director Gisborne that it isn't right that the electoral areas carry the financial weight of this facility. I believe the city has an obligation to participate in some financial way. They were not able to grant the permissive tax exemption, okay? But there really is no other mechanism by which the city contributes to this facility. And so to me, it makes a lot more sense to fund it through general grants and aid. I am concerned that if we continue on, it will be an added burden to electoral areas without a lot of benefit. And so I would like to see the support for this be spread more evenly and include the city of Powell River as well as the electoral areas.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I can understand the desire to have it moved into general grants and aid, but the truth is this year we have more requests for the money than we have budget in the area. So I think all these sort of things should be taken into consideration in future budget deliberations, but It came initially from social planning service. I think for this year, at least, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it should stay in social planning.
I'll speak as well. I'll speak against this. I agree in general with the idea of reconsidering and reviewing how we fund CRC and our social planning service in general. But I think that needs to be done in the budget process. The challenge we have here is that we didn't do that in the budget process. We allocated the funds to the pots of money on the basis of what we've done in recent years. And so we have sufficient funds in social planning for this. In fact, more than sufficient. There was originally 115,000, although some of that's already been earmarked, but we have sufficient funds. In the general grants and aid, we have, I believe, $78,000 remaining. So if we funded 50, that would leave 28, and there's still a number of projects on this agenda that are being requested from general grants and aid, and that would not allow them to all pass without major reductions. And so I think that for those reasons, I'm not in favor of this, even though I support the idea in general. I think we used to fund it from general grants and aid. I think finding a way that we all contribute makes sense. But I think right now we're trying to find a solution for this year. Director McCormick, did I see your hand up for a second time?
Thank you, Chair. No, I was going to ask a question, but in fact, it's been answered. So thank you.
Okay. Director Elliott.
So I'm actually not opposed to moving it to general grant and aid, but I also know that puts other projects in jeopardy that maybe not a good idea. So if we can't get support for it to be in the social planning envelope, I would not let it stay that way, and it would impact my support for other projects in general grant and aid, which I in principle also support. But we can't fit everything in general grants and aid. So in my opinion, this motion, even though it makes sense for the reasons that were put forward, it just doesn't seem to allow us to approve all of the things that we feel are priorities this year. So I'm with Director Brandner in saying that maybe we discuss how to shift things for next year through the budgeting process, and we try to work together and approve the things we need to do this year with the structure that we have. Whether that makes sense to the area directors or not is entirely up to them, but I'm not going to move forward without some sort of solution for lift. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elliott. And I saw Director Doubt raise a yellow piece of paper, so thank you for getting my attention. The floor is yours.
Thanks. So I'm not in favor of this motion. I think there is plenty of opportunity to discuss the social planning service and the budget and the social planning service, and the social planning grants collection that we do, and the grants in aid future, and how the definitions of the grants in aid work, all of those things. And that's something we should spend considerable time talking about in the budget process. I think when I look at today's agenda, there is sufficient funding in the different grant services to cover all of the business that's on our agenda and to fund those groups because they're all deserving groups. I think we could do this, but I don't think this amendment will help us get to a solution.
Thank you, Director Doubt. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the recommendations that are coming, there's 3 recommendations for grants from social planning, which total, if they were all approved, $17,445. So looking at that calculation, it does appear that there is enough money in the general grants and aid to take the $50,000 from that source and still, should we so choose, approve the other recommendations. So I believe there is sufficient funding. I believe it's a much more equitable way to fund a service that I agree benefits the whole region. I agree that it's a valuable service, but I don't believe it should fall to the backs of the electoral area taxpayer to fund the full meal deal. So that's why I support moving it to general grants and aid. I think that's a much fairer way. And there is money in the fund to do it.
Thank you, Director McCormick. A corporate officer, may I ask for clarification on the, and maybe this is for Mr. Cohenhoven, on this source of the targeted source of funds for the remaining items on our agenda. Are they not all from general grants and aid? Director, corporate officer?
Or yes, thank you through the chair. My understanding is that there's 3 items on here that are to come from general grants and aid, and ORUG was originally proposed to come from general grant and aid as well. So yes.
Thank you. Okay, so is there any further discussion on the Director Gisborne? This is on the amendment.
Yes, this is on the amendment. So this isn't the main motion. This isn't about whether or not we actually fund LIFT. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is, do we fund LIFT through a more fair and equitable grant source of funding, which is general grant and aid. That's what we're voting on. That's the amendment. If the will of the committee is to vote down this motion, then there are other options to fund LIFT. Area A has $15,000 in their electoral area grant and aid. Area C has $8,000 that we could pull from. There's a little bit left on Texada, but not much. There's even some money in economic development. But taking money from those electoral areas, it's still the same problem. The amendment that is before us today is, do we choose to fund through a fair and equitable manner? The question isn't whether or not we even fund them. Like, I can be opposed to funding LIFT, but I can still vote in favor of this amendment because this is about where the money comes from. Yes, it is true. There isn't enough money in general grant and aid to fund everything that we want. We ran into that issue last month, that we've got all of these requests and our grant intake occurs after we pass the budget. So we've set the limit, and now we got to figure out who's going to get a piece of the pie. And I also need to remind the assembly that there's another grant intake that's going to be coming up later this year. So there might be another $50,000 request from another organization that we want to fund. Are we going to find ourselves in that position of, well, area A has 15, area C has 8, and then we just start taking it from where we can? And I don't think that's fair or equitable. We divvy up general grant and aid to where it needs to go for where there's a regional benefit. That's the purpose. And if we got to cut back on ORUG, which we have done in the past, because there wasn't enough money in general grant and aid, if we also have to cut back the amount to LIFT because we don't have enough, then we can do that too. But that would be a separate amendment. The motion before us is very simple, very simply put. Do we fund LIFT through something that is regional and fair, and equitable? And if we vote against it, we're saying is no, the electoral areas only pay. So I'm in favor of this amendment.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, maybe we can get to some voting here. So I'll call the question on the amendment. This is to change the grant source from the main motion, to change it from social planning to general grants and aid. Is that clear for everyone? Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor of that amendment? All those opposed? Director Elliott, were you opposed? You put your hand down. So all opposed.
Sorry, I'll clarify my vote. My hand was in the positive. I was trying to be in favor.
You're in favor. Okay, so opposed was Director Brander, Director Dowd, and Director Fall. So the amendment passes. Okay, so now we're on the amended motion, which is to fund $50,000 from LIFT from general grant and aid. Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. with that amendment, I'm feeling definitely more positive about supporting the recommendation. In spite of the initiatives that are on the list that LIP provided, Director Lennox still witnessed problems during the day today, which continue in spite of these things. Now, maybe the picnic area at the back will help people congregate in the rear. I'm willing to give it a chance. But I also feel that unless LIFT can get its street order and disorder together so that we don't a year from now, see the problems that we're currently seeing. I can support it this year, but I don't think I could support it in the future unless they make every possible effort to end the crime and disruption to the neighboring community. So I guess having said all that, I am supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, I'll speak and then I'll recognize Director Gisborne. So now I'm feeling a little disconcerted because we have after this, so this motion is for $50,000 out of $78,000 from general grant and aid. That would leave $28,000 to potentially support ORUG, the 2 Lasqueti applications, and the Therapeutic Riding Association. There simply isn't enough money, and my concern is that the Lasqueti applications will be pushed to the wayside. And I have a question, but I think I know the answer to it. But that's my concern. My concern is that unless we entertain and support a reduced amount from a significantly reduced amount to allow those Lasqueti applications to go through, I will find this incredibly unfair to Lasqueti, because we could have funded this. We had the money, we budgeted the amount, and then now we're putting ourselves in a situation where we maybe don't have the money. And when I get to the Lasqueti applications, I will have comments on how putting the Lasqueti applications last means that Lasqueti is going to be stuck with whatever crumbs are left over after we deliberate here. And so I find that not very fair. And I'll talk about it more later. But first, my question, and the question for the corporate officer is, out of the 4 applications or applicants following this motion, and this relates to the motion because it relates to what else we can do, is there any opportunity for any of them to fit into any of the other, into the social planning grant? Or well, I guess the social planning grant. Would any of those 4, ORUG, the LCA, layered history, the link, landowner stewardship, and the therapeutic riding, would any of those 4 fit into the terms of social planning grants?
If I may, Chair, I don't actually have the social planning service bylaw open right now. Maybe Jason Cowenhoven might know if those would fit within, but it may take some research. Okay,
Mr. Cowenhoven.
Thank you, through the chair. When we first put these scenarios together, we looked at if any of these would fit into social planning, and in my discussions with other staff, these grants didn't quite fit the criteria. The initiatives were more related to heritage conservation or recreation and land stewardship, and not as much social planning activity. So my current suggestion is no, they would not fit into social planning.
Thank you for that. So Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Your question about whether something fits in social planning or not is a really good question. And I think that at the end of the day, the ultimate decision lies with the board. And I'm taking a look at our list, and there is one item that I'm not going to get into, which is 5.5. I think that's a social planning thing, but I'm going to avoid that because Director Elliott's here, so we're not going to get into that discussion so that we don't have to keep kicking her out of the room. But my question for Mr. Cowenhoven is, what is the current amount of general grant and aids? Because I know that we did allocate some at our last month's meeting. And I'm just trying to figure out what could be an equitable amount. So I'm just curious. Thank you.
Mr. Cowenhoven, do you have that figure for us?
Sorry, just a clarifying question, Chair. We're just looking for the balance available.
The balance available right now at the start of this meeting.
Okay, so that is on page 3 of the current lift report. There's $78,000 in the general grants and aid, $19,738 in area A, $5,130 in area B, $10,679 in area C, $5,785 in area D. There is $6,667 in the economic development service and $61,779 in social planning.
Okay, thank you. Director McCormick.
Thank you. It seems to me that the Therapeutic Riding Association would qualify for social planning. And I'm only saying that because we're not voting on it right now, so it doesn't compromise Director Elliott. But yeah, I do think that could come from social planning. So there is that option for us when we get there.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on this item? Director Lennox? Nope. And then, Director Dowd. Director Dowd. Sorry, you got the yellow paper.
I'm trying to get your attention, Jeff.
Thank you for that.
But this is why I voted against the previous motion. Okay? Because I read the reports from the previous recommendations from staff about the grant allocations. And I read the reports about the status where we are today. And when I came to the meeting, I was fairly satisfied that we could fit in all of the applications that we're looking at today in the places that are recommended by staff successfully. There would be limited opportunity for future applications later in the year, but all of these could be approved in one easy go. And now we're going to have to make decisions on all of the ones after 9.1 because there is going to be a limited amount of funds in the grant and aid service. That's where the board has just put itself. I regret that we're here, but those decisions are going to have to be made somehow. So I would rather pay attention to voting on the issue that is before us, if we can. We can do one at a time and try to get through it without trying to resolve all of the issues on the whole table without any further discussions. I'd just like to get to the motion on 5.1 and then we can try to sort out the rest of it.
Okay, thank you, Director Dowd and then Director Elliott. Sorry, Director Gisborne and Director Elliott.
I have a question for Mr. Cohenhoven, and this is like a bit more of a hypothetical in terms of funding, and I want to make sure to see if my math would be okay. 30,000 to lift, 30,000 for ORUG, 10,000 for the Lasqueti Community Association, the 2,445 for the Conservancy, and 5,000 for Therapeutic Riding. When I crunched the numbers, that came in just under the 78,000. Is that correct?
Mr. Cohenhoven, is the math add up?
The calculator.
Thank you, Chair. If the proposal is that all of those would come from the general grants and aid service, then that would total $77,445, which does fit within the current 78,000 available.
Okay. I'll let the other directors speak, but I have a proposed amendment, but other people had their hands up, so.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you. I also regret that we're here, but I wasn't prepared to go forward with a recommendation from this committee that would fail that was clearly going to fail when we get to the decision point at the board. Since I have no vote in the one area, and I would have to trust the rest of the board to be moving forward with approving that recommendation. I didn't feel like it was a safe recommendation from the board without commitment from the board, the area directors that they were on board with this plan. And so I didn't hear enough support for the original motion to help me feel comfortable in that area. So I'm in favor of this motion. And I do realize it puts us in a predicament. And I'm hoping we can resolve that as a board. The handling things one item at a time, the way we do things in a board discussion, often makes it difficult for us to come to a consensus on how we best meet all the needs. And it is a little bit awkward and clunky, and I regret that a lot. But I have made my position fairly clear that if we're not going to move forward with funding LIFT, which I think is best for all of us in this greater community, that I would support it through general grants and aid. I don't want to make that other projects at a disadvantage, because that doesn't feel good to me, but neither does moving forward with a recommendation from this committee to the board that won't pass when I don't have a vote. That doesn't feel good to me either. And so we're in this position because of who has votes on which areas, and the support for the overall package would have to be a consensus among us all. So unless we're willing to step back from making motions immediately all the time and have a consensus building conversation, this is where we're going to land every time. And it's partly to do with our process. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elliott. Now I have a comment. I have Director Brander, and then actually I have a motion I want to make. Director Brander, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really quite distressed as to where we are right now, because the way I saw it going forward, I thought everything would be funded nice and neatly. And I don't share the fear that Director Elliott has that the money for LIFT wouldn't pass at the board level. I felt that there was a good chance of it happening. And the way we're going down the road right now is essentially guaranteeing that some of the other projects won't be funded, or at least to the level that they are requesting. I thought we had a pretty straightforward plan laid out in front of us based on the motion that was initially made without the amendment. But this amendment has thrown everything up in the air, and I honestly don't know how to deal with this now. It's a real challenge. I'm hoping that the chair can come up with a motion that sets things straight for us.
Thank you. And then the okay, Director Dowd, and then
we have a motion on the floor.
Yeah, I understand.
Maybe the right way to go about it is to vote on the motion on the floor, and then if you want to see if there's other motions, you could do that after we vote on the one that's on the floor.
Okay, thank you for your comments. But my motion actually is to postpone. I want to move, and the corporate officer will correct me if I'm out of order. I'd like to move to postpone the motion on the table until after item 5.5 in the agenda.
You can vote. Thank you, through the chair. You can postpone to a certain point in time.
Okay, and so if I get a seconder, I'll explain why that may help us. Director Lennox, thank you. And I'll speak to that. The reason why is because we heard from Director Gisborne some ideas about 30,000. Well, that's just speculating on what else we might do with ORUG and the other ones. We don't know, so if we do this, then that actually brings us back to the LIFT, and then we can see where we can get the money from, whether there's sufficient in general grant and aid or a mixture of general grant and aid and social planning. Maybe that might work too, because I believe there's quite a bit of support around the table to fund LIFT to their full request. Maybe not, but some funding, and we can see where that's at. So I think that would help us. We can deal with the other 4 items and then come back to this. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I got a quick question. Postponement is usually till the next meeting. I think the procedure bylaw would be that we table this item until we handle the other items. And I was going to also request that if this motion passes, can we have a 5-minute bio break?
Yes. So I believe that, and the corporate officer I'll call on, but the procedure bylaw says you can postpone to a certain time. So corporate officer, could you clarify what the appropriate motion would be?
Either way, sometimes you might want to table something so you can deal with something that's more urgent, or you can postpone to a certain time. I think either one would work in this situation. So whatever this assembly is comfortable with.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it as is because the tabling talks about urgency, and I think it's not that this is urgent. It's just procedurally it would be easier to deal with first these other items and then that item. Okay, any other discussion on postponing this until after 5.5? Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I think that I'm okay with dealing with it later, and we're reminding the board that we're making recommendations to the board. If we end up at the board in a situation where delay, postponing puts us backwards in supporting lift, that I may not support motions at the board level that don't include lift as the bigger package. And so I'm perfectly prepared to talk about it later, but I'm just letting people know I'm supporting funding lift at this point in time, and our overall package needs to include that. And it has to, for me to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Dowd.
I'm not in favor of postponing this. Okay, we are in a postponed discussion now. We postponed it from the last finance committee. We postponed it from the board meeting, and now we're dealing with it again. We all know the agenda. We all know that there's limited. We know that changes have been made today by the amendment. We know what's coming next on the agenda. I think we might as well deal with them one at a time and do the best we can. Yeah, I agree. I am in the same position as Director Elliott. I want to make sure that that funding request for lift is granted one way or the other, whether we do it now or whether we do it later. That's going to be what my vote is based on. Why don't we do it now? And then we can start going through the other 4 items that we have and try to figure it out from the place where we're at. And we have another meeting that starts at 4:30. So
thank you. So is there any further discussion on the motion to postpone until later in the meeting? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor postponing, and all those opposed? 1 opposed. Director Dowd. Thank you. I think we need a 5-minute bio break, so till 2:15 or so.
insane.
Did you want to move Roger out? And Paul for Horace.